In the middle of a forest in Oklahoma, a gas station attendant hears something moving through the foliage. At first, the worker thinks it is an injured animal, perhaps a sick raccoon, disoriented, or simply rabid. But when the creature lunges at him, what we see is not a normal attack, because in that brief scene, small black splinters can be seen beneath his skin. His bones appear twisted, his joints bent in directions that should not be possible. And yet the man remains conscious long enough to understand that whatever is attacking him is not a normal animal. And the creatures in Splinter do not devour their prey the way a conventional predator would, nor do they pursue humans out of cruelty or hatred. What they do is much worse, because these creatures are created by a fungal infection that invades the flesh, replaces its tissues, and turns each infected body into a tool to reach the next one. But here we are not exactly talking about a conventional zombie, nor an individual creature taking over a body. Instead, it is a parasitic colony capable of using muscles, bones, and corpses as if they were temporary parts of a much larger organism. Now, to understand how this infection works, we first have to look at the place where it appears. The story takes place in an isolated, wooded area of Oklahoma, surrounded by trees that may have been growing for centuries with barely any human intervention. Seth and Polly go there, hoping to spend their anniversary in nature. But they end up being kidnapped by Dennis, an escaped convict, and Lacey, his girlfriend, who is going through severe withdrawal. None of them know that, before they ever cross paths, the infection has already begun spreading among the animals in the forest. In fact, the first host they encounter is a small animal run over on the road, possibly the same raccoon that attacked the gas station attendant. Its body appears completely mangled, but it continues moving in an extremely disturbing way. And while the group changes the damaged tire, Dennis feels something prick one of his fingers. It seems like an ordinary splinter. However, that tiny spike contains everything necessary to begin the infection. That is why the name Splinter perfectly describes its main method of spreading. This organism produces black needles that pierce the skin and introduce infectious material into the host. In the same way, when a fully assimilated body attacks, it does not try to bite or devour its victim in the usual way. It throws itself at the victim, embraces them, and impales them with dozens of splinters. The more of them that penetrate the body, the faster the transformation appears to be. In contrast, when exposure is limited to a single splinter, as happens with Dennis, the process advances much more slowly and remains localized. Even so, a slow infection does not mean a harmless one. At first, the area around the puncture begins to darken. Then come the pain, spasms, and loss of control. Dennis's fingers bend until they break. The muscles in his forearm begin contracting on their own and break his arm, and eventually the entire limb attempts to attack the people around him. The most disturbing part is that Dennis remains fully conscious while all of this is happening. He can feel his own arm stop obeying him, but he cannot prevent the organism from using it. Basically, the splinter does not need to infect the entire brain before it can control a body. It only needs to spread through a specific area and take control of the muscles and tissues it reaches. This explains why a limb can act against the host's will, while the rest of the person remains conscious. It also explains why cutting off Dennis's arm manages to stop the infection, because while it is still localized, most of the colony is removed before it can spread beyond the shoulder and reach the organs or the head. However, amputation only works if it is performed in time. The gas station attendant, for example, already has splinters protruding through his face, arms, and chest when Lacey finds him. Despite this, he is still capable of speaking and begging for his suffering to be ended. This suggests that the invasion does not immediately kill the host, even when it has already infected the body completely. It can be deduced that it first consumes or replaces nervous tissue, alters the blood, and takes control of the body section by section. During this process, the victim can remain alive and conscious, trapped inside an anatomy that is deforming without their permission. And when Seth examines one of the infected fragments, he discovers that normal blood has practically disappeared. In its place is a thick, mobile black substance that appears to be waste-produced while the organism metabolizes the body. Seth concludes that it feeds on blood and absorbs nutrients at a cellular level. Although we do not know exactly which components it consumes or how it replaces the tissues, everything suggests that the infection progressively transforms the host matter into biomass that can be used by the colony. Therefore, the victim's death does not stop the process. Once the organism has established its network inside the body, it can continue moving it even when there is no longer a living person left to control. This is what gives the infected their zombie-like appearance. However, as I mentioned before, these are not truly undead. They are empty organic structures manipulated by a fungus whose only objective is to move closer to new sources of food. Now, this control has an even more disturbing characteristic. Each infected fragment can continue acting independently. We see an example of this when Lacey's hand becomes trapped in the door and is torn from her body. The limb does not die or remain motionless. It supports itself on its fingers, turns toward the survivors, and begins pursuing them. Later, a severed piece of the monster enters the gas station and forces them to take refuge inside the walk-in freezer. In this way, the characters discover that cutting apart the host does not always eliminate the threat. If they are not careful, it can actually make it worse. That is why firearms are so ineffective. A bullet can break bones, tear away tissue, or separate a limb, but the splinter fungus does not depend on a heart, a brain, or a central nervous system that can be destroyed with a precise shot. If the colony is distributed throughout the body, each piece retains part of the organism. In addition, the fungus does not simply preserve the bodies it infects, it can also repair them in a certain way. We see this when Officer Terry arrives at the gas station and ignores the group's warnings, only for the creature to attack her and split her body in two. After tearing Officer Terry in half, the creature drags the upper half of her body onto the roof. Later, the film shows the fungus's splinters reconnecting both halves, using her body to reconstruct a larger infected mass. What we do not clearly see is the exact moment when it incorporates additional remains. Even so, the fact that it collects the separated parts of its victims demonstrates that it can reuse infected biomass to increase its size and create increasingly grotesque bodies. Basically, the fungus seeks to accumulate as much biomass as possible and continue spreading. So the more it infects, the greater its chances of increasing its size, its reach, and the number of splinters it can produce. That said, the infection does not appear to combine bodies according to any conscious design. The resulting forms are clumsy, asymmetrical, and grotesque. Arms, legs, torsos, and bones are positioned wherever they can generate movement, even if that movement destroys the original anatomy. In this way, the creature does not attempt to preserve the human body. It simply takes advantage of anything that can still contract, crawl, or pierce. Even with this ability, the splinter does not appear to be truly intelligent. Its behavior resembles the growth of a root searching for water or mold extending toward a source of nutrients. Its modus operandi is to remain motionless, react to stimuli, and direct its bodies toward prey, but it does not appear to understand its surroundings the way a conscious predator would. And it is precisely this simplicity that allows Seth to discover its main sensory system. During the first attacks, the creature that the gas station attendant has become ignores Seth and goes after the damaged car. The engine is overheating, which means it is producing more heat than any nearby body. Seth then realizes that the organism is not seeing its victims. It is following their temperature. To the splinter, a human being, an animal, a running engine, or a flame are simply heat sources that it must move toward. That is why the walk-in freezer works as a refuge for the characters. By lowering the temperature of the environment and of the people hiding inside it, the creature becomes unable to clearly detect them. Seth takes this idea even further and covers his body with ice to lower his temperature until it is close to the temperature outside. For several minutes, he manages to walk in front of the monster as though he were invisible. However, the method has an obvious limitation. The human body constantly tries to restore its normal temperature, so the camouflage disappears as soon as he begins warming up again. Now, this does not mean that cold kills the organism. It only reduces its ability to locate prey or keeps it inactive. One indication of this is the infected animal carcasses that appear at the end of the film. They remain motionless in the forest, but they are still covered in splinters and ready to reactivate when they detect another source of heat. Therefore, freezing it, hiding from it, or lowering your body temperature only buys time. Fire, on the other hand, does destroy its tissues. The flames burn the infected biomass and damage the microscopic structure that keeps the colony active. Ironically, its dependence on heat can also be used to lure it directly toward the very thing that can kill it. Fireworks and fires divert its attention because they produce a stronger thermal signal than human bodies. But to completely eliminate it, burning a limb or a visible section is not enough. Every fragment capable of carrying the infection has to be incinerated. That is why Dennis's final sacrifice is crucial. After helping Seth and Polly escape, he realizes that he has been infected again, this time too close to the neck for another amputation to save him. He then shoots the gas pumps and finally the propane tanks, destroying the gas station, the creature, the corpses, and his own body. In doing so, he eliminates any remains that could have been left among the wreckage. However, the explosion at the gas station does not solve the real problem. In the final moments, we see other infected animals among the trees. They remain still, perhaps inactive or in some form of dormancy, waiting for new prey to approach. This confirms that what happened at the gas station was not the birth of the creature, but merely an encounter with a single colony that had already spread throughout the area. Seth and Polly survived because they destroyed one specific focus of infection, but the ecosystem surrounding them could contain many more fungi. At this point, the big question is what the splinter fungus really is and where it came from. The film never gives us a clear or definitive answer. Seth, who is currently pursuing a doctorate in biology, says that it is something new, a form of life he does not recognize, and the black substance that replaces the blood reinforces its anomalous nature. That is why one of the most popular interpretations is that it came from outer space, perhaps inside a meteorite, and found terrestrial animals with absolutely no evolutionary defenses against its infection. However, there is another equally disturbing possibility. Near the area, there is an experimental oil extraction site, along with signs prohibiting access. Fungi can remain inactive for long periods when conditions do not allow them to grow. So the splinter could be an extremely ancient terrestrial life form, buried underground and accidentally released when drilling reached a layer that had remained isolated for a very long time. In fact, the environment itself makes this idea seem the most likely. The forests of Oklahoma are presented as ancient places, with areas that have barely been altered by humans. If the creature had already been there long before the protagonists arrived, it could have survived by infecting small animals, entering periods of dormancy, and reappearing only when it found enough non-plant biomass. Because of this, industrial activity would not have created the organism. It would simply have broken the barrier that had kept it contained. Even so, none of these theories are confirmed. Splinter has also been compared to real parasitic fungi, such as Ophiocordyceps, which is capable of altering the behavior of certain insects to favor its own reproduction. The difference is that the splinter takes this strategy to a much more extreme level. It does not actually need to keep the nervous system intact, since it has been clearly established that it can move corpses, control separated body parts, and fuse multiple hosts into a single mass. And the influences of Carpenter's The Thing, Alien, and zombie cinema are quite obvious, but Splinter combines those elements in its own way. From The Thing, for example, it takes deformed flesh and the assimilation of bodies. From Alien, the idea of an organism whose biology is incompatible with ours, but can still invade it. And from Zombies, the image of corpses moving without consciousness. That is why the deformed creatures it creates are so disturbing, yet at the same time so effective. To the creature, broken bones are not injuries but new joints that can be used to attack more effectively or move more fluidly. If these parts become separated, they turn into individual creatures. Basically, the infection transforms what normally defines the boundaries of the human body into interchangeable pieces. In addition, the use of practical effects in the film reinforces this feeling. The creatures have weight, texture, and a physical presence that makes their unnatural movements believable. Of course, CGI is also used to complement certain transformations and movements, but much of the horror comes from prosthetics, dark blood, exposed bones, and real bodies contorting in front of the camera. This makes Splinter feel less like a digital effect and more like something that has actually invaded the character's physical space. Because of this, the central fear of the film is not simply being chased by a stronger monster. Instead, it focuses on losing control of your own body. As we saw, Dennis can speak, think, and feel, but his arm no longer belongs to him, even though he can still feel all the pain caused by the invasion. The gas station attendant can beg for help while splinters pierce through his face, and the fungus has already spread throughout his body. So the Splinter does not need to be an intelligent organism to become a potentially devastating threat. Its advantage is that it can infect not only animals but humans as well, and it does this without the immune system doing anything to stop it. In the end, that is what makes the creatures in Splinter so disturbing. We never know whether it came from another planet, whether it was released from deep underground, or whether it had always been hiding among those forests. But its origin matters less than its ability to adapt to any organism it encounters. Because the Splinter does not see humanity as an enemy. It does not even know what a human being is. To this colony, we are nothing more than heat, blood, and a temporary vehicle it can use to reach the next body. And as long as a single active Splinter remains inside the body of an infected animal or person, the infection will not be over. And with that, we've reached the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on the notification bell to stay up to date with all my new videos. I also want to give a special shout out to the channel members. Thanks to you and all of our viewers, we can keep diving into these kinds of disturbing and thought-provoking stories. Thank you so much for your ongoing support. And if you want to support the channel and get access to exclusive content, early videos, and other perks, I invite you to become a member. Just click the join button below this video. See you in the next one.